Hello, everybody. This is Sarah Colata, and I'm bringing to you a new project, new series, where we will be bringing to you amazing architects to talk about architecture. And this is all a project of Architecture Masterclass, which really I started about 2 years ago. And it was a project of teaching architects how to teach online, organize webinars, organize online courses and workshops online, which has definitely been very useful right now during the COVID times. And it really, the mission of it is to empower you to grow professionally and personally. We are really a number one place currently that is fully committed to help architects create profitable educational products. And this is Architecture Masterclass lecture series. And our guest today is Joe MacDonald. Hey, Joe, thank you so much for joining me today at Architecture Masterclass.
It's my pleasure, Sarah. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Yeah. Excellent. So guys, Joe is an architect. He's a principal and lead sustainability specialist. Joe founded Urban A&O, which is in New York, and while serving as associate professor in the Department of Architecture at Harvard University Graduate School of Design, and now he serves as its principal. He regularly incorporates his academic research into practice, and his work has been published and exhibited widely. Urban A&O emphasizes net zero carbon neutral design research, renewable energy, climate mitigation, ESG reporting, public policy, emerging sustainable material science applications, environmental analysis, and building retrofits where possible. Today, he's joining us to give a 45-minute lecture on net zero carbon neutral architecture design, during which you can post your questions in the comments below, wherever you are watching at, whether it's on LinkedIn, on YouTube, or on Facebook. And after the lecture, we will have 15 minutes where I can read out the comments and Joe can answer your questions personally. So welcome, Joe. Thank you. And the stage is yours.
Sarah, thank you very much. That was a very gracious introduction. I'm really happy to be here, and the topic that I have chosen to speak about today, not only is it related to the design work that we do, but it's fundamental to our research-based practice. And I think even just for the general audience, the topic around definitions that are being used in all fields, actually, I will try to give at least my view on the definition of them. So the title of the lecture today is what is the difference between net zero and carbon neutral? So one of the most relevant topics today across all three major design disciplines, architecture, landscape, urban design, is the positioning of one's practice that we take in relation to climate change. So in Sir David Attenborough's 9-minute speech to the UN Security Council, he made this remark, which is quite impactful. He said, "These are threats that don't divide us. These are threats that should unite us." And in part, he's referring to the crisis of geopolitics. And even here in the US, we see challenges on agreements around a climate crisis agenda, politicizing what should be clear evidence. However, it isn't. So it's easy to get deep in the weeds about facts and figures and word definitions, but without a deep understanding of these challenges, the magnitude of what lies ahead for us on planet Earth is very dramatic. So what we do know is that buildings generate nearly 40% of annual global CO2 emissions. Of those total emissions, building operations are responsible for 28% annually, while building materials and construction, which we typically refer to as embodied carbon, are responsible for an additional 11% annually. So yes, it is incumbent upon us as shapers of cities to address these threats. Advancements in material science occur within the public and private university settings and within the private sector as well. A great example of this, a recent example of what I call American ingenuity and philanthropy, is the recent $100 million donation from the CEO of FedEx that will help fund Yale's launch of the Center for Natural Carbon Capture, which will focus on the development of interdisciplinary natural solutions to reduce atmospheric carbon levels. The Center for Natural Carbon Capture is part of Yale's multidisciplinary planetary solution project, which is a major collaborative research effort to address climate change. The center will specifically focus on the reduction of net greenhouse gas emissions by developing strategies to increase natural carbon storage processes such as photosynthesis. With this donation from FedEx, Yale plans on additional research and cutting-edge technologies and support outreach for the Yale Environmental Leadership and Training Initiative. The Clinton Foundation has also launched a climate resilience program under the Clinton Global Initiative. So if we were to just return to some definitions that are commonly misunderstood, we can look to an organization called the Carbon Trust. It assists businesses, governments, and organizations in reducing their emissions. The trust reminds us that explaining the difference between net zero and carbon neutrality is a bit of a challenge. So let's just dissect that and dive right in. Net zero is considered the benchmark standard for decarbonization. In the financial world, that's across all asset classes and portfolios where millions of financial instruments are at play, in addition to their own operations, which is easier to address. The United Nations definition in its Race to Zero campaign states clearly that net zero means we are not adding new emissions to the atmosphere. Emissions will continue, but will be balanced by absorbing an equivalent amount from the atmosphere. However, there is no recognized standard for net zero as of today. On the other hand, carbon neutrality is defined by the PAS 260 standard. PAS means publicly available specification. It's a document by the British Standards Institute, and it aligns with UN SDGs, the Sustainability Development Goals. BSI PAS 260 is a specification detailing how to demonstrate carbon neutrality. Carbon neutrality is a state of net zero carbon dioxide emissions. This can be achieved by balancing emissions of carbon dioxide with its removal, often through carbon offsetting, or by eliminating emissions from society, which is known as the transition to the post-carbon economy. In October, after years of student protests, Harvard University announced that it'll divest its $42 billion endowment from all fossil fuels. And then again, as a reminder, the UN's Race to Zero aligns with scientific targets to put the world on track to meet the climate goals set out in the 2015 Paris Agreement aimed to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. To achieve this, the global economy will need to become net zero by 2050. Net zero considers emissions generated by the entire value chain. Net zero is harder to achieve than carbon neutrality. One key difference is that net zero involves eliminating indirect emissions generated by the entire value chain, which includes all suppliers and customers. These emissions are known as Scope 3 emissions, and they include emissions generated by purchased goods and services, third-party distributors, and use of sold products, which means the emissions generated when customers use a company's products. To become net zero, a company must eliminate these emissions on top of its Scope 1 emissions, which are emissions it is directly responsible for, and Scope 2 emissions, which are emissions generated by purchased electricity, heat, and steam. It's important to note here that Scope 3 emissions are by far the largest and oftentimes remain unaddressed because they're harder to define and they're much harder to eliminate. All three of these emission scopes must be reduced on a timeline that is compatible with the 1.5 degrees Celsius target of the Paris Agreement. Now, by contrast, carbon neutrality only covers Scope 1 and 2 emissions. To achieve net zero, offsetting must permanently remove atmospheric carbon. A second key difference is that under net zero, any residual emissions that prove impossible to eliminate, must be eliminated by purchasing greenhouse gas removals, or GGRs, that permanently remove an equivalent amount of carbon from the atmosphere. This is a last resort, although offset purchases occur often, to the point where the term greenwashing comes into play. GGRs can include afforestation, which is a really interesting concept, providing that the trees remain in the ground for approximately 100 years. It can also include direct air carbon capture and storage, where emissions are physically removed from the atmosphere. We're going to move on to a design deck and then an R&D deck, which backs up the design deck from my practice. There's solid research around carbon sequestering concrete. Now, concrete and cement, which is the primary mixture within concrete, the concrete industry itself is responsible for about 8% of carbon dioxide emissions worldwide. Achieving carbon neutrality, much like net zero, also allows residual emissions to be dealt with by purchasing offsets that leads to carbon reductions or efficiencies. So finally, what is the difference between zero emissions and net zero emissions? I've just explained that net zero means achieving a balance between GHG, or greenhouse gases, put into the atmosphere and those taken out. Zero emissions and zero carbon, net zero, are slightly different, because zero emissions means that no emissions were produced in the first place. Earlier this year, the International Energy Agency, a Paris-based intergovernmental organization, said that achieving net zero emissions by 2050 is probably the greatest challenge humanity will have ever faced. So I'm going to move into a design deck now. And I would like to talk about one project in particular called Project Energos. It's near Reno, Nevada. So here we're looking at the site. It is in the desert, and there are several components to this project, Project Energos. The client is a clean energy infrastructure team called TerraScale, based in Los Angeles. And this project is about a year old, and it still remains in a concept level. But it's fairly comprehensive in that all of the buildings I'm going to show you are carbon neutral. Now, one of the buildings, the next slide that I will show you, is a data center. And I can talk a little bit more about that. I just want to identify that this project by TerraScale has won 3 international awards. It won the Opal Award, the Outstanding Property Award in London, Platinum. It won an Iconic Award for Innovation, Sustainability. And just most recently, it won the Novum Award in Helsinki. So you can see the landscape that we're working with here. The next slide is the data center. And it's actually this building that won the 3 awards. And so what you begin to see here on the skin of the building is our research into several different types of concrete, low carbon concrete, aerated concrete, green walls. You can see a solar array on the roof. Now, to get a data center to carbon neutral, there are a few ways to do this. One is hybrid energy. So in this case, there's a massive solar array on site combined with geothermal. Data centers have an intensive water use. And so the use of backup batteries is very helpful. You can also have a wastewater treatment plant on site to recycle the water that you're using within the data center. The reason data centers are so intensive with their water use is because, of course, they're very hot inside. They're full of data racks. They need to be air conditioned 24/7. They have redundancy factors, cybersecurity. Oftentimes they're built into mountainsides like this one, or they're built completely underground. And they most recently they have also been built on floating barges. Again, part of Project Energos was a series of carbon neutral buildings. In this case, the visitor center is based out of is built out of polystyrene. On site is also the Dark Horse Rail Center, where goods and services will be brought to the site. It is made out of recycled steel. And then there's a series of warehouses. Again, here's a 1 million square foot warehouse. What we realized during COVID was that companies like Amazon, just took off with delivery of goods and services. And forecasters now believe that we will never return back to the conditions prior to COVID, that the idea of warehouses are popping up all across America, and they are being used for transit stations for the movement of goods and services across the US. This is another warehouse. We call it the double warehouse. It's made out of CLT, cross-laminated timber, which has the strength of steel. And you can see on top of the double warehouse the green roofs. We'll go into that a little bit in more detail in the R&D deck. I just want to give you some idea about the design work of Project Energos. And this is the last slide, where we also are very much focused on indigenous landscape solutions. So, of course, here we're working with an arid landscape. And then quickly, we'll just move to the R&D deck. So we always start every project with R&D. So, for example, when we look to concrete, which is, of course, one of the worst emitters worldwide of carbon dioxide, we're looking for new solutions while still using concrete because of its strength, but trying to reduce the carbon footprint. And here's a great example of how we do that. We tried to almost eliminate from 79% down to 13% cement within the mix. And we increase agents like fine and coarse aggregates. And then we're also looking at secondary cementitious materials or additions. These assist in reducing, again, this cement. And of course, what goes along with all of this are, a series of calculations, equations, graphs and charts, projections. We use various software modeling tools to reduce the carbon footprint of the buildings. There, on the horizon, are some very exciting new materials like lightweight concrete, autoclaved, aerated concrete, self-compacting concrete, which has an intense strength to it. And then, of course, we are always critically evaluating, yet incorporating rating agencies such as LEED, BREEAM, WELL. And then for another important point, what you're seeing here, this is in relation to that project in Nevada. Sourcing material becomes a big issue. So if you are trucking source material across the country, that is not the solutions we're looking for. We're looking for locally sourced materials. Oh, and this is just one last very experimental product called photovoltaic concrete. Still very much within the labs of universities like MIT, still undergoing tests. These are the innovators on the concrete landscape. And then, of course, solar. We can fly through this, but when we introduce solar into a project, we have to, of course, balance performance with cost. And so this is just an overview of the presentation we made to the client about how we can do that, and then ultimately what we recommend. These are just various manufacturers of solar. Now, when it comes to green roof technology, green roofs, I was involved with a project, the California Academy of Sciences, under the design directorship of Renzo Piano. Now, California Academy of Sciences has the largest green roof in the world. Cal Academy is also the first and only to date double platinum LEED building in the world. And that was from 2008. So I'm going to show you, here you can begin to see the section of a green roof. There's a kind of a common misperception about green roofs. No, you cannot walk on them. The plant material is far too delicate, and the soil depths have to be very shallow because of the weight. And these are just some of our construction details. It shows you how complicated it is to design and build a green roof. And this is something else. This is just an argument away from what you're looking at here, which is tilt-up concrete. Tilt-up concrete is not the best solution for data centers, for example, because we simply can't control the development of the concrete. And then finally, we go to green walls. I showed you that on the data center we have green wall applications, but there are many types of applications. And here we identify the four main ones: the pocket, climbing, container, and modular. And I'll give you examples of all of them. So here's a modular system. Of course, the maintenance occurs on the outside of the building through a forklift. This is the pocket planter example. Container. Climbers. These are very easy. This is one that is on a parking garage in Los Angeles. This is a very interesting project. This is not by us. This is the largest green wall in the world, and it's in London. And you can see here that it will absorb 8 tons of pollution annually. Also very well incorporated into the program and the facade of the building. Here you see the scale of the project. And yet just another system called the Jacob rope. And these are prefab units that are just brought to the site and tilted up. So what we're trying to offer the client is a range of solutions with a wide range of associated costs. This is the one that we used on the Nevada data center. It's aerated concrete where the plant material actually grows out of the concrete, out of very small soil beds. Another prefab solution, specifications, details. And then we're just going to wrap up with another great product, because of course everybody knows the amount of asphalt, at least in this country, that covers our ground planes. And if we're going to do that, there's a way that we can do that responsibly, and that is through rubberized asphalt, where ground up used tires become part of the asphalt mix. And I believe that's the last slide. So I will stop sharing. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Joe. This was fascinating. I have some questions to ask. I also encourage you guys that have been watching us for the last 45 minutes, if you have any questions, it's time to post them now. Just post them in the comments below and I will read them out loud to Joe and he can take the next 15 minutes answering them. And I will kickstart it with my first question. Coming from a startup industry, it's quite a big talk right now about 2030 sustainable development goals that basically are looking into developing a better future for all. And they're also challenging businesses to lower their carbon emissions. So certainly there is a lot of big businesses that already started to work on that. And I see more and more smaller companies emerging that help businesses lower their carbon emissions. But where do you start as an architecture practice if you still haven't begun to shift in this direction?
Well, I mean, of course, our architecture is a service industry. So architects can't unilaterally begin to address these issues without first informing the client about how relevant it is and also how affordable it could be. So, for example, publicly traded companies have an obligation to reduce their carbon footprint. Private companies do not, but yet there is an atmosphere, at least in the US and clearly across the EU and around the world, to begin to address these issues. And so I think that the role of the architect here is to show that that the solutions can be, you know, on budget, on time, and also beautiful and at the same time. It's going to take like a general mind shift among the community. And so we have a multi-pronged approach. We're getting pressure from community groups, which is fantastic. And we're also getting pressure, for example, if we look just to last month at COP26, that was a very dramatic moment for the world because if you didn't have to attend COP26 in Glasgow, you just had to watch it on TV. The people who were protesting in the streets of Glasgow, you know, were Gen Zs and millennials, and those people were not in the room. They were not being heard, and so that I think that moment, the first week of November, I think that kind of triggered a global understanding of all ages that you know, we need to get moving on this.
Yeah. And also how we actually deal with these problems. We all, each generation has a different way. Perhaps the older generations gather in the room and talk about the problems. And it seems like the younger generation, with also having tools such as social media, communicating very quickly amongst the world with each other, they're a little bit more proactive and they want their voice to be heard in different ways too.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
So what would you say are the major challenges to tackle net zero and how do you overcome them?
Well, what I've tried to present today is that there's there are two lanes for achieving carbon neutrality or net zero. Of course, net zero by 2050 is the ultimate deadline. But there is, it's a, I have one foot in practice, one foot in academia, and that allows me to explore these issues in an academic setting, and then also apply them in practice. So it's that combinatorial approach between research and then also the built environment, and it's almost every design firm now has a chief sustainability officer, almost at the level of C-suites. And so that's the first step forward, I think.
Yeah, that's very, very good advice. And what are the impacts of COVID on net zero?
Well, we do know that the supply chain has been seriously hampered in the U.S., and that is a direct result of COVID. But also, as devastating as the pandemic was and remains to be, we still are very much living with COVID. It allowed us, at least 12 to 18 months to, really rethink our value system as a community. So I think that pause, where we were all, sequestered at home, and I think it changed the way that we think about community and loss, and also the idea of, I see that whole 18 months as this, very positive convergence of many, many things. So we had a pandemic. We had a race relations crises in America and around the world. And then, the clear evidence of climate change, the degradation of the sea floor, the forest fires in Germany, the mudslides, this, they're a beautiful project, well known to many in the UK, is the Eden Project by Grimshaw Architects. That the site of that those biomes, those domes, that site fell away, where they almost lost that building. So it's really at the forefront, I think, of everybody's lived experience. I don't think anybody came through that period unaffected.
Absolutely. I have one more question. How do you reconcile net zero with the many other sustainability challenges? For example, how do we make circular thinking central to net zero agenda?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's I think that we are so fortunate to have organizations like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, because it's we have economists or thinkers who like Kate Rayworth, who talks about donut economics. This is a fascinating work, and so Dame Ellen MacArthur, she is the foundation is offering these topics and talks. The Financial Times, the New York Times, they're hosting these kind of conversations, and it's a one massive effort to raise awareness around the world, and it is not class based. It is not. This is not for the 1%. This is for the 100%. Again, I just would refer to the power of Gen Zs and the effect they had at COP26.
Yeah, interesting. Well, thank you so much. Is there any other question you'd like to be asked?
No, I enjoyed it so much, Sarah. It was fun. Thank you for the opportunity.
Really
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you guys as well for connecting with us. I'm very excited to kickstart this project. There will be more. As I mentioned at the beginning of this lecture series, it's a new project we're starting where we will be bringing in architects to talk about their work and things that are close to their hearts. We support very much so an idea of leading with your expertise, as well as having a methodology to back your work. So I think that research and practice should go together hand in hand. And Joe certainly is demonstrating how the both parts of his business are feeding into each other and making it stronger. And so what we're trying to do is promote more and more architecture methodologies here online through digital means, hopefully in the future creating a library where you can access a lot of lectures and grow and educate yourself. And if you are yourself interested to give a lecture, just reach out to me. I'm Sarah Colata, and you can find me anywhere online. Just type in Sarah Colata, even in Google, and you will find one of my social media platforms where you certainly will find a way to get in touch. This is Architecture Masterclass with Sarah Colata. Thank you so much, Joe MacDonald. Thank you, everyone, and I'll see you soon.